Hello everyone, thank you so much for being here. Really excited to see so many faces. Good to see that the crypto scene is so strong here in Tokyo. And for those that flew in from different parts of the world, we appreciate having you here. Today we have a debate panel discussion with Andy Zhang from Pith, with Terry from Eclipse. So Pith is the main oracle on Solana and a lot of other chains. They are perhaps one of the fastest growing oracles in the space, and they are one of the first teams in crypto to have an SVM. And Eclipse is also one of the most promising SVMs that's coming into the crypto space right now, which basically means they're taking the Solana runtime and using it for their own functionalities and use cases. So I'm glad to have them both here. They're both really smart guys. And our topic today is, I think, a pretty deep topic, and we're going to do it from the point of view of Bitcoin, but I think it actually touches on the things that everyone builds and the decisions that are made around decentralization and whatnot. So the question is, can we compromise the foundational principles of Bitcoin to achieve acceptance from governments and the mainstream? So Terry, I'll have you on the side of compromising the foundational principles to gain acceptance, and Andy, I'll have you against compromising these basic foundational principles. So as an example of some of these principles, we have things like decentralization, we have things like immutability, we have things like uncensorable block space, essentially. So did you want to start? Why should we compromise these foundational principles?
Yeah, for sure. Like immutability, I think that's an easy one. It's very difficult to deploy either a base layer and or a contract layer that is immutable, because that means number one, it has to be bug free. Number two, it has to be kind of the end state whenever you are deploying it. And as a business that's continuously growing, if you're an institution, if you are a government, and or if you are a corporation, like your needs and your customers and your data usage and your even government policies in terms of how you dictate whether that data can be released or not is changing constantly over time. And so to have that set day one is virtually impossible. Let's just, on the note of immutability.
Yeah, I have the worry that, like, we come into this question, right? Why the government and why the mainstream are interested in doing something about Bitcoin, about crypto? Because they are special. And why they are special? Because they are immutable. Because they are decentralized. Because they have so many different features that any other financial instruments don't have. That's why Bitcoin is valuable. And what if we compromise a few these are foundational principles. These are not like some common features that every financial assets have. These are foundational principles that Bitcoin have, and that's how Bitcoin is special. So I think from this perspective, if we try to compromise a lot of foundational principles, the government or the mainstream may lose interest actually towards Bitcoins. I think I meant that there are so many like challenges of like, okay, how we can accept these Bitcoin foundational principles in terms of like from mainstream, and how we can make it more easily accepted by the mainstream, and how we can make it easier for everyone to trade or to do any activities in terms of like using Bitcoins. But think about what we did for some other historical features or historical products. We don't do it from compromisation. We do it from like development improvement instead of like compromising some foundational principles. That's my stance.
So on the side of compromise these foundational principles, what would you say the difference between building a mutable, updatable smart contract on a blockchain is versus building on a Web 2 server?
I mean, I guess in a sense, like Bitcoin itself is not immutable either, right? Like Bitcoin has undergone multiple user-activated soft forks. OPCat is coming to Bitcoin. I believe it's on testnet already. Like a Stark proof was verified on Bitcoin testnet. BitVF v2 is coming to Bitcoin, and so is Bitcoin immutable? No, it's just slow, right? Versus Ethereum, we've had multiple hard forks. We've had like a big hard fork and then multiple hard forks that update, and with like consensus of the clients as well as the EF, various functionalities of the chain itself, raising the gas limit, the block gas limit has been raised like an infinite number of times. So arguably, it's not a matter of like, do you deploy something and you keep it constant? It's more so a matter of like, when you deploy something, is there sufficient methods to ensure that there is consensus among most of the stakeholders in a way that drives the network in a fair way? And if you have a smart contract, it's upgradable. Upgradability authority is a 2 out of 3 multisig. 2 people are part of the foundation, and 1 person is an external contributor. But is it a group chat with the foundation? Yeah, of course. It's same thing as deploying to a server, with the exception that you largely get the benefits of insofar as people understand that, okay, this is the contract, it's open source, it is actually verified on Etherscan, I know exactly what type of program I'm interacting with, right? But if in the middle of the night you decide to rug all of a sudden that all the funds are stuck on the bridge, then that is a problem.
Yeah, I think these are improvements that makes Bitcoin more usable among general public or among mainstream and among everyone that you are interested in doing some activities on Bitcoin or Bitcoin layers. But does it really increase the acceptance from mainstream or government or like people who are not interested or are not doing something about Bitcoin right now? It is not something that we try to improve or try to compromise that makes Bitcoin more usable. It is pretty much like how we can create some innovations based on the foundational principles of Bitcoin. So I think these are like 2 different directions. Let's say some products that already been accepted from mainstream and the government, let's say ETFs, Bitcoin ETFs, right? So these are like hosted or led by the government. So these kind of things are some improvement and development based on the foundational principles of Bitcoin. And the reason why people or the mainstream users are investing in Bitcoins or Bitcoin ETFs is because they see the value of Bitcoins. And the value of Bitcoins really lies on those foundational principles. So I'm not saying like, okay, we need to stick with we need to bear with Bitcoin so slow and it's not like commonly usable because of they're so old school, or they are just those evangelists are raising these kind of principles that everyone should follow these kind of rules and structures. It is not the case. It is really the case that how we can build something based on those principles.
So when I think of governments, institutions, and Bitcoin, I think there's largely 3 ways in which they interact with the chain. Number 1 is as a sovereign store of value. Immutability, the way the network is today, that's perfect for these sovereign store of value use cases. Number 2 is as an investment case and as an investment product for generalized retail and other institutions through something like an ETF, which is fully custodial. And obviously, like, you can't argue that the ETF in any sense has some relationship to the core values of Bitcoin. Okay. So, and number 3 is to actually use the network, to put data on the network and or use it for payments, etc. But if you want to do number 3 as a government institution, you fundamentally need privacy, right? When I talk to institutions, when I talk to government agencies, like the one thing that they're most concerned about when it comes to public blockchains is that all transaction histories, balances are auditable. And that's a big problem when it comes to data privacy laws. So what needs to happen is you need to have a private data availability solution. But if you have a private data availability solution, how do you prove to the people that are transacting on your network that in fact, the state transition function that you enacted as a sequencer is actually correct? And you do that via verifying a proof of correct execution, in this case a ZKP, back to the base layer. And so if you're an institution and want to use Bitcoin, you need privacy. You can only have privacy if you have private data availability. You can only have private data availability if you have verifiability. You can only have verifiability if you have OPCAT, and you can verify Stark proofs on Bitcoin layer 1, and hence you can only have that if you have mutability in the base layer.
So do you think these kind of innovations in terms of like... Okay.
Just say...
Okay. So my question is, do you think these innovation which protects the privacy from institutions and those kind of technologies that build based on the current concerns and worries from those institutions and the government, that compromises the principles of immutability and also like everything is visible on chain? Is it like this compromisation, or is it just like building something that can improve the ability of helping them to protect their privacy?
Well, when I talk to institutions, they always fundamentally say that they cannot build on a public network with full auditability. So it's not that you compromise and because for the sake of compromise, is that the institutions won't even come unless you change the technical characteristics of the network, which of course comes as a I mean, you can argue whether that's a compromise or not if there's verifiability, there's liveness, and there's safety that's guaranteed no matter what, right? And the verifiability works even on a consumer grade hardware. But like things have to change because the institutional needs are fundamentally in opposition to how the networks are built.
Yeah.
So I think we drew out something that I was really hoping for, which is the fact that immutability might not be the highest principle. It might be the ways in which that mutability is possible, which goes back into perhaps the main question in this entire debate or space, which is decentralization. And I'm curious, perhaps in less of a debate fashion, just from each of your opinions, when you look at this, is how do you take something like decentralization and also be able to build a startup that can spread and grow and get to the point where it is able to be decentralized like Bitcoin and Ethereum have gotten over time? Do you start with it as radically decentralized from the beginning, or do you take a progressive approach over time?
Yeah, I think progressive approach over time. I think we're at Solana conference. Solana is also kind of going down that path where things are like progressively becoming more decentralized over time. I think it's inevitable. For example, we're in L2. We have a small number of sequencers. We don't have one. We decided to start with 4, which is more decentralized than most L2s that exist today. But there was a trade-off, right? Like we couldn't have started off with a fully decentralized set of sequencers and proposers, because that would have prevented us from doing some of the interesting business kind of innovations and experiments that we wanted to do around value redistribution and value capture. So because we had a smaller set that we had to worry about, and I think this is the fundamental trade-off, the type of experiments you can do and the type of updates you can push out and the speed at which you can conduct them is significantly faster, I would say, exponentially faster, the smaller and smaller number of parties that you have to coordinate over.
I agree. Yeah, I actually agree with we should take the progressive approach to grow and to build any specific projects or protocols or any innovations, because this is the way that we can make it more efficient. But bear in mind that why we build it in a progressive way from the first beginning, because we want to achieve the goal of decentralization in the end, right? So we are going to this direction. It's just like we're taking different approaches to go to this direction. But this idea of decentralization is already planted in our hearts that we need to go in this direction, and then when time comes, we achieve this goal, then the real value comes. So it is really okay, so we're taking this approach to arrive in the destination of decentralization. So we don't compromise it, but really it's because this is a really long-term kind of building path that maybe right now at this stage we see lots of current protocols and development. It is not fully decentralized, but this is how we envision in the future that something is really valuable is from the decentralization nature of things. Of course, we need to compromise because from the government perspective, they want to be involved and they want to take part in the whole control monitoring status. But I think the thing we want to research or explore is there a decentralized way that government and mainstream can participate in that can help us to achieve this goal without sacrificing decentralization?
I think that's probably private data availability with verifiability. So there's 3 aspects, right? There's safety, there's liveness, and there's censorship resistance. What you should probably do is don't go towards a path where a single machine or a single entity can brick one of these completely, right? Like go at least to the point where you give off a certain percentage shaved off in one of these three, but you don't have like, oh, you know, if the eclipse sequencer goes down, boom, 0 liveness. More like if the eclipse sequencer goes down, you have a couple missed slots, and so, you know, 3/4 of the time you still have liveness, you still have censorship resistance, you still have safety.
Yeah, yeah. I think like the idea of decentralization really help us to reshape our mind of doing things. Right. Sometimes when like back to like 10 years ago, we don't have this mindset of decentralization. So everything we think is like from top to bottom. So whenever you build something, you want control first, not context first. So doing things like, okay, you use control, then things may go wrong because like it really based on the decision from the decision makers, which may be like monopoly or just a small group of people. But right now we really have this kind of decentralization seed in mind when we do things. So we starting from the beginning, we think like, okay, we don't take one or like really a few big giant decision makers to control everything. We start from bottom to up. So basically, this is how decentralization changes our mind and doing things like progressively, but in the end, we want to like achieve this goal of, let's say, there are like so many different stakeholders in the space, and then even though we do data privacy, we take innovations, we take technologies on Bitcoin or like doing data privacy to compromise the need from the mainstream and the government, but we still agree that even though we take this approach, the maximum benefit comes from decentralization nature.
How much value do each of you attribute to decentralization as a founding ethos or principle of the space versus as a legal wrapper to avoid liability with governments?
It's likely the only thing that's actually valuable about these public blockchains, right? It's that, I mean, if you zoom out kind of, you know, we've been in the weeds for too long, man. We've been trading these pump.fun coins for too long. But like, if you kind of like zoom out and think about, oh, why did Visa choose Solana? You know, why do people do cross-border payments on public networks? It's because they're fast, they're globally replicated, they're censorship resistant. It's the fact that no single, you know, Visa can't transact on a platform where Tristan can be like, hey, today I'm going to censor all your transactions. You know, your merchant up in New York, the food you gave me was bad, censor all your. Like, you fundamentally cannot come on a platform where that's possible, and so like, yeah, decentralization is the whole point.
Yeah, this gives me the thoughts of like, imagine an ideal world. Why those mainstream and government or institutions want this privacy or things like that? Is it because they want to do something that is not publicly not available, but that is not suitable for everyone to know? Like in an ideal world, I think everything should be visible, everything should be public available, and there's no like barrier of deciding things. Everything should be okay. You can see everything, but you just don't participate in the decision process. But whenever like I want to bring something out that that is verifiable, then like in the future, in the ideal world, everything is like public available, everything is transparent, so there's no bribery, there's no monopoly, and there's nothing that prohibit you to participate in any activities in those decision-making process. So I mean, like, I know this is an ideal world, but this is a world that everyone want the world to be, right? And this is something like we need to chase after the goal, even though we know that we cannot achieve this goal ultimately. But this really help us to make things more transparent, to make the government better, to make the world better. Just zooming out from a very evangelist perspective.
But for sure, like securities law or Reg Arb is
yeah,
real.
of course, yeah.
So we have people here who may be interested in joining the Web3 space, might be curious about it, might have heard of some of these founding principles of crypto, these things like decentralization, and it aligns with their moral values or with how they think of the world. What would your guys' argument be if somebody came and asked you, should I work in Web 2 or should I work in Web 3? And what were the motivations for each of you specifically to dedicate your life and careers to this space?
Yeah, I'll go first. Okay, so for me personally, the reason why I go to the Web3 space and have been working with in this industry for like more than 3 years or 4 years, it's basically because I believe in the value that really matters. So, I mean, like, because Pith is doing like things about like data, financial data specifically. So we deal with lots of like institutional players from the upstream because they are providing data to the network and we are bringing the data on chain. So basically we need to tell those institutions that why this data matters and why your data coming into blockchain matters, because it really helps us to shape the next generation of finance and really bridge in the Web3 space and Web2 space. So there's not a kind of pattern transfer for me personally from Web2 to Web3. It's basically I'm thinking about a way that I can contribute to the current financial system that can make everyone's life easier. So I think like TradFi, because it's already been in the world for more than like 100 years. So there may be some foundational like compromisation that we need to make so that the financial system can continuously work for thousands of years in the future. But is there any like possibility that we can improve the current technology and improve the current actions from institutions that we can contribute to build the next financial world that works for a broader amount of people? And I think maybe decentralized finance or blockchains is the solution. And at least I can do something to contribute to the kind of transformation from a purely traditional financial system to a mixed or a kind of bridging space that people can freely choose whether you want to trade or whether you want to work in Web2 or Web3. So it's pretty much just to contribute my tiny little bit efforts to the whole transformation of the industry or of the world.
Trust is a multi-trillion-dollar industry. If you say it like this, it's freaking abstract. Like, what does that mean? Think about the times when you bought a house or rented a house, and you had to have a middleman to broker the transaction between you and whoever owned the house or whoever was leasing the house. You pay that person verifies you paid, they tell that whoever's selling the house, the person selling the house transfers the property rights to the escrow, then the person then pays that person, and then the property rights are transferred to me. Think about if you've ever received payments online. Why do I have to pay 2 to 3, 5, 6, 7% to some other third-party person in order to process payments online? Especially if it's cross-border other currencies than where my native banking is. Why does that take so many days to settle? Why do I have to wait 3 to 5 days for ACH to land? Why do I have to wait, pay 7% based on how much my customer wanted to pay for my services on top of that to a credit card or a Visa, MasterCard, or all these settlement houses and or payment gateways? It's because trust is huge. Like, it's such a huge industry. But crypto and what public blockchains have enabled us to do is create a backend that abstracts away and completely erodes the cost of trust. People say, your margin is my opportunity, right? Jeff Bezos said, your margin is my opportunity. If we see someone making a ton of money, that's a fat industry that we can disrupt. There is a multi-trillion-dollar fat industry that crypto has the possibility to disrupt, right? And that is that of middlemen, that is that of trusted intermediaries, and they are all skimming money off of all of our pockets. Public blockchains can solve this. We're still in the first inning. The old industry is only like 10 years old. Right? We're still in the first inning. We have many more decades left to build. We have many more trillions left to grow. I would highly suggest come join us and then see what impact you can make.
Could you give an example of how blockchains work in this trust minimizing fashion?
Yeah, for sure. So in the past, say if I'm sending you an ACH transfer, right? I talk to my bank and I say, hey, I want to send Tristan some money. Okay, say I use a credit card. Then the credit card payment lends me some dollars and then I pay that to the merchant. And then they verify that that payment went through, and then they have to send it to a settlement gateway, right, or settlement clearinghouse. And in that process, they batch all these transactions, and then they have to make sure everything works in place. And they are only open 3 days a week. And then once that happens, they then send out the payments to the correct places. And this entire process takes about 3 to 5 days. There's a couple intermediaries. There's the settling agent, the clearinghouse. There's the merchants. There's the people that are doing the payments on the merchant side. And then there's the credit card issuer and all this. And yeah, there's a lot of intermediaries. It's a very expensive process. It takes a long time to clear. But public blockchain, I can send a USDC. Boom, it lands in 3 seconds, or 12 seconds, or 0.4 seconds, depending on what you're on. How beautiful is that?
Yeah. My case is basically, okay, I'll give an example of imagining in the traditional finance world, there's a hedge fund or trading house that you want to do high frequency tradings on a specific market. Then what you have to do is first you grab the data, right? And how you can grab this data, you have to buy the data from exchanges or data providers like Bloomberg or someone else that has this data. So originally, you have to negotiate with those data owners. Say hey, we want to sign a contract with you, so you provide this data on a yearly basis, and every year I pay you maybe $1,000 or $1 million. That you can continuously provide this high frequency data for me, and then I can use this data for me to decide whether I want to trade, I want to place the transactions or orders. So that's how TradFi doing things at the first beginning for this hedge fund or trading houses. And then we go to Web3 space, where those DeFi protocols, they do the same thing on chain. They do tradings, and they do, let's say, high frequency tradings on chain. And then the approach that we do is they need data. So how they can get this data, they find a data provider, but they don't have to sign a contract with them. So there's no backend negotiation. There's nothing hey, I want to use your data. Can you open the API for me? And then I will pay you $1 million every year, and then you can provide this data based on my preference. There's no case like this. You don't have to sign any contracts, because pretty much every data is on-chain verifiable. Just there's a data provider that gives you this data access, but these data access are actually public available on-chain. And then the only thing you need to do is you integrate it directly by writing smart contract. And how this data provider is making money, whenever you use this data, you pay this data fees based on the preset algorithm from smart contract. So you don't have to sign anything, because everything is publicly available and verifiable on blockchain. So whenever, let's say, okay, if some data provider is providing a bad data that makes you lose money, you want to write a suit, you want to, let's say, you want to find me on court, then everything is the court can just browse the blockchain browser, and then the court will know everything, that if you do something bad, or if you really have some manipulations on this data. So this is really the magic of decentralization and the magic of trustless integration. I think this is only possible on blockchains, and yeah, that's the real value that we can transfer from TradFi to DeFi.
As a last blitz question, what do each of you think government/mainstream adoption for Bitcoin or cryptocurrencies or blockchains in general will or could look like?
For governments, sovereign wealth store of value, I can see that as a strong use case. I don't think governments are going to transact on Bitcoin. I don't think payments is going to happen through Bitcoin. I think Ethereum and Solana are significantly better candidates for that matter. And if not, government-owned private data availability validiums, I think, are probably the best in terms of seeing payments adoptions. So what will governments use it for? I think sovereign store of value. I think there will be some form of government-run network that plugs into public networks, but I think that will most likely be built on other more general-purpose blockchains. And that's kind of how I see participation going forward.
Yeah. I think specifically for maybe mainstream/government, especially for those developing areas who do not have a very developed or structured financial market, this may be the opportunity that they can build something based on the same starting points for every countries right now. Because you think about the TradFi or like those developed financial markets, maybe cities that are popping in our mind is like New York, London, Hong Kong, maybe Singapore, and some other cities like Tokyo as well, right? But these cities are very developed. They have like long history of finance, maybe like more than 100 years. So for a developing country or for a undeveloped financial market, it's really hard for you to catch up the path for those very like mature market. But when you start to build a financial market based on Bitcoins or based on other crypto assets or digital assets, pretty much every country start at the same point, at the same starting point. Of course, they have experiences for this developed market, but actually the competition or the kind of difference is not so much. So you may have some like opportunities or chances that you can build another developed market, which you can maybe override this mature market using another approach.
Okay, great. Thank you both for coming on. Thank you, audience, for listening, and we'll go on to the next one.
Thank you. Thanks, Kristen, for moderating.